ทยศาสตร์นะคะก็ได้รับเกียรติอย่างสูงสุดทีเดียวนะคะจาก professor ท่านได้บินมาให้กับคณะนิเทศศาสตร์โดยเฉพาะในการบรรยายนะคะในหัวข้อต่างๆอย่างที่พวกคุณอาจจะพอทราบแล้วว่าเรามีการบรรยายจากท่านทั้งหมด3วันนะคะวันนี้เราก็จะเป็นท็อปิกเกี่ยวกับทางด้าน strategic communication อาจารย์ท่านนี้ค่ะเป็นอาจารย์ที่มีชื่อเสียงมากจาก University of Canberra ออสเตรเลียนะคะท่านได้เขียนหนังสือหลากหลายเล่มทีเดียวอาจจะเซิร์ชออนไลน์แล้วก็ถ้าสนใจฟังแล้วแบบรู้สึกสนใจสามารถที่จะเซิร์ชออนไลน์แล้วก็ซื้อผ่านทาง Amazon ก็ได้นะคะวันนี้ค่ะจะเป็นท็อปิกทางด้าน strategic communication ถ้าหนูคนไหนไม่ถนัดภาษาอังกฤษมากถ้าคำแนะนำของครูก็คือให้ลองฟังเอากลิ่นเอาไอเดียว่าเขาพูดอะไรบ้างท่านพูดอะไรบ้างโดยณวันนี้ค่ะครูได้เรียนกับท่านอาจารย์ว่าอาจจะไม่ได้ลงลึกมากแต่อยากให้คุณได้รับบรรยากาศถึงการเรียนแบบนานาชาตินะคะว่าทางนู้นเขาเรียนกันอย่างไรบ้างครูจะเริ่มต้นเซสชั่นด้วยการให้ท่านอาจารย์แนะนำตนเองแล้วก็เข้าสู่ใน topic strategic communication ที่หนูจะได้เรียนรู้ว่า strategic communication สามารถเอาไปใช้ประโยชน์ทางด้านมีเดียทางด้าน public relations หรือ advertising ได้อย่างไรนะคะเดี๋ยวครูจะได้ส่งไมค์ต่อให้กับท่านอาจารย์แล้วก็ให้พวกคุณเพลิดเพลินกับท่านอาจารย์ได้เลยไม่ต้องอายนะคะถ้าหนูอยากจะ participate อยากจะ discuss อยากจะถามอะไรครูนั่งอยู่เป็นเพื่อนด้วยตลอดเวลานะคะไม่ต้องกลัวนะคะ
Thank you very much, Ten. And before I start, I want to thank Ten for inviting me to come to Thailand to talk to students and staff at Rangsit. I really appreciate the invitation. I hope I do what Ten wanted me to do and talk about the right sorts of subjects. What a beautiful room this is too. You're very lucky that you have rooms like this. We don't have nice big rooms like this at the University of Canberra, certainly not with really comfortable seats. I'm going to talk from down here because I tend to walk a little bit. So if you get giddy, tell me to stop walking. I don't intend to make you giddy. So what I'm talking about today is the concept of strategic communication. What is it? How might we pursue it? This is the first of 3 talks. The next talk that I give will be about public relations strategy and planning, how you go about writing a public relations strategy so that you can make sure that at the end of you implementing that strategy, it worked. And then the third talk will be about strategic communication and how that might link up with marketing communication. So first today I want to define what strategic communication actually is, argue how we might link strategic communication to business planning, and that's an important concept. I want to report on some research. It's research that I did, and it has an Australian context, but it's interesting in the context of strategic communication and what I mean by strategic communication. And I want to propose to you, on the basis of the research that I did, a new definition for strategic communication, how we might think about that concept being used in professional practice. I want to begin with a very old man. I'm not that old, despite my dark brown hair. This is Niccolo Machiavelli, who was a philosopher in ancient Italy. He wrote a book called The Prince, and you might have heard his surname. Things are Machiavellian, devious in other words. The book really wasn't that devious, but it was about how princes or rulers, in this case the Medici who ruled Florence, can be successful as rulers. And he said that the prince, who has a policy which reflects the times, whose policy adapts his policy to the times, is likely to prosper, be successful. But the prince who does not, whose policy clashes with the demands of the time, will not prosper. And I think that's a really interesting quote from Machiavelli's book, The Prince, because I see it as a metaphor for issues analysis and strategic issues communication. Because if strategic communication is about anything, it's about dealing with organisational issues, external issues, or public policy issues. And what I'm talking about today, and certainly my research found, was that this metaphor, this idea of identifying issues and developing strategic solutions for an organisation to deal with that issue, challenges us as practitioners, some of you when you become practitioners, to think beyond tactics, to think beyond the here and now, and to think about what happens in an organisation's external environment in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, that might come back and impact on what we do in the marketplace. And so that's where I want to go. So, why are we thinking about this? Well, people, these guys down the bottom have been writing about this concept for some time. And they make points like the reason that organisations engage in professional communication is so that the communicative ability of the whole organisation can be developed. They argue that there's considerable debate and confusion about what the concept of strategy itself actually means. Do people in organisations, business planners, communication planners, actually understand what the concept of strategy really is? This guy Henry, who's the last quote up there, is a business management scholar. And he makes the point that strategic management decision making can explain the strategic choices that face senior communication managers like us, like some of you will be, like I have been. So there's a need to understand what strategy really is before we make some decisions. My particular research interest is in the influences on decisions that senior communication people in organisations make. What are the factors that influence them? And I'm going to give you some of that flavour as we go through. I'm about strategic choices. I've moved away, even though I'll talk about tactics a bit today, I've moved away from tactics. I've moved away from wanting to talk about, in a marketing communication sense, the new ad for Coca-Cola to sell the latest version of Coca-Cola. That's a marketplace thing, and I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in things beyond that. This guy writing in the McKinsey Quarterly, and yes, the McKinsey Quarterly is a journal that's put out by McKinsey's, the international management consultants. He writes that there are three things that are the kernels, the core, if you like, of a good strategy. One is that a good strategy is based on some kind of diagnosis, a diagnosis of the problems that an organisation faces. And the strategy then becomes a guiding policy, he says, that we need to follow in order to overcome the obstacles that we might have found in that diagnosis. And the strategy also gives us some coordinated steps to help us achieve that guiding policy. So this guy's being really, as a management consultant, being really prescriptive about what is a good strategy. But he also says that we need to work out what are the crucial things in a situation that we face and find a way, design a way to overcome them and to resolve any issues that we might discover. I brought my hard hat today, and even though you can't see it, it's up on the screen. I brought my hard hat because some of the things I'm going to say might challenge some of the things you've been learning at university. It will challenge some of the things you've been learning at university if you've been studying advertising or marketing communication. It may not challenge you if you've been studying public relations. So I've got my hard hat on so that students and staff who are here can throw things at me when I say things they mightn't agree with, and I can protect myself. And the first thing I want to show you is something that might upset the mark on people, but we have to go there. I want to talk about a communication context. If you've read Phil and Schultz and Very and all those American writers about marketing communication, you'll know they talk about integrated communication involving marketing, advertising, sales, direct sales, personal selling, and public relations. Well, they're Americans. Any Americans here? I can have a shot at Americans. Well, Americans aren't always right. And particularly they're not always right when viewed from a European, continental Europe perspective. And a lot of critical scholars in communication come from Europe, and they challenge the American paradigms. And these guys, back in 2004, challenged the American paradigm about marketing communication. And I think it's really interesting. So what they say is, first, there's marketing. Marketing's, if you like, the economic, statistical approach to the things that we do as communicators. And that involves pricing and logistics and distribution. We've got a product, how are we going to market? We need to set a price, we need to be able to distribute it, how are we going to distribute it? And then allied with that is public relations. And if, they're fairly standard things, there's probably a bigger list of things that public relations people do, but they're basically the things: crisis communication, media relations, running the organisation's contributions to not-for-profits and charities, dealing with public affairs and government relationships. They're all public relations things. And then along comes Don Schultz and comes up with the concept of marketing communication. And marketing communication took from public relations specifically things about product publicity, about sponsorships, and about the brochures that go with selling the new edition of Coke or the new BMW or whatever. And then these Europeans said, well, then there's advertising. How does that fit in this kind of mix? And they have a double element to advertising. One is mass media advertising, the ads that sell the Coke. The other is corporate advertising, and corporate advertising is generally run in most organisations by the public relations or public affairs function or corporate communication function of the organisation. And so we're starting to see a bit of a split here from the concept of marketing communication. I would say to you that the question of corporate identity, and we know that identity and image are not the same thing, the question of corporate identity might very well be a marketing communication function. I don't really want to have an argument about that, but the point about this slide and the way it has disclosed is to suggest to you that there is a world beyond marketing communication. That if you accept that marketing communication involves some bits of public relations, they're likely to be the bits. But it leaves a big chunk of public relations behind that somebody's got to do. And what does it do? Where is it? What's it about? Dealing with community relations, for example. How Coca-Cola deals with the people who live around the manufacturing plant they've got, for example. That's not a marketing thing. Some marketing people might say, oh, we should put it there because everything's marketing. But it isn't really a marketing thing. And so we're beginning to get a split from the dominant paradigm that the Americans have so successfully promoted since the 80s about integrated marketing communication. There are things that need to be done which are not directly related to the market. So we need to then start, if we accept that, we need to then start thinking, what are the factors that influence senior practitioners in business, in government, because lots of government departments have communication teams, in public relations consultancies, and in not-for-profit organisations, what influences them to take the strategic decisions, not the tactical decisions to issue a media release or to run an ad or to organise for the boss to give a speech? What are the things that influence them in terms of their long-term thinking about where the organisation needs to communicate in order to do whatever it needs to do to protect its reputation and so on? And I think that's a really interesting question. But why is it? Why is that an important question? Well, we're talking about what is a significant professional practice issue. It may not be a significant issue to you guys who are not yet practicing, but if you're actually in a business, say a public relations consultancy or even an advertising agency, start thinking about that. What are the things that influence the decisions that my boss takes about what we do? And because strategy and tactics are sometimes blurred, and I'll show you some of that in a moment, people confuse what's a strategic approach to something and what's a tactical solution to an issue. Because that gets confused, this makes a really interesting academic topic. An academic topic mightn't bother our undergraduate friends, but it's an interesting topic for us as academics to think about because it might help explain why the world is the way it is in professional communication. So, I'm going to argue with you today that strategic communication is about dealing with issues, and where are those issues going to be? First of all, Tony Jakes, who's an Australian, he's a former public relations practitioner, a former academic. He now runs a website and a little business which is about managing issues, helping people businesses to manage issues, and he's a world recognised expert on issues, academic expert on issues communication. Indeed, his PhD was about issues communication. And Tony makes the point that issues management, that's identifying and analysing the importance of issues to our organisation, needs to be addressed strategically. He says that not every issue that an organisation faces is strategic, but it needs to be managed in a strategic way. Paul Argenti and his colleagues, who wrote in the MIT Sloan Management Review back in 2005, an article which was called the Strategic Communication Imperative. Imperative, that's a strong word. It's so important, it's imperative that we address it. They wrote that managers, they were writing for managers need to think beyond the day-to-day when they're thinking about strategy. They need to think in the mid to long term. And here we're starting to now tease out from that double circle chart the strategic elements that so far have been dealt with by public relations. We've got to think beyond the here and now. These guys, who are Scandinavians, talk about there being a question about how practitioners understand the notion of strategy, which is why I gave you that slide from Rummel, about how they deal with management and about how they provide leadership is unclear. We don't know how practitioners deal with that. My research was an attempt in my context to have a go at putting a big toe into that water. And finally, Franson and Johansson argue that we should, as communicators, particularly those of us who are academics, should be engaging with other disciplines, management, sociology, philosophy, to find ways to help us explain what it is that we do as professional practitioners. And I'm going to use a little bit of that point later on. To talk about a rather complicated theory, I'll make it as uncomplicated as I can for you. The theory is called Structuration Theory. So, having given you that bit of a preamble, what do I mean by strategic communication? What do people who write about Stratcom say that it is? Why is that important? And how might we apply it? So what is it? Well, in 2007, Kirk Hallahan, those of you who study public relations will, particularly if you're in second or third year, will understand, I hope, who Kirk Hallahan is. He's the guy who talked about active and inactive publics, about aware publics and unaware publics and non-publics, and how you can move them from one to the other. So Hallahan and some colleagues in 2007 launched a journal called the International Journal of Strategic Communication. And it's all about trying to understand this concept of strategic communication. And they wrote the first article in the very first edition in 2007 of that journal was by this guy and his colleagues, some of whom were from Scandinavia. And they tried to define what strategic communication actually is. So first of all, they say it's informational, then it's persuasive. When we start to talk about persuasion, we've got to start to think about ethics.